Welcome to Off the Books. This is a casual conversation between Gary and I, two longtime partners and co-founders of LeanLaw. I am Jonathon Fishman. I am the CEO, and I will serve as today's host. That's my natural role, isn't it, Gary? Gary wants to say hello to folks, and just, I don't know if Rachel wants us to do that. I don't care. Tell them a little about
Okay.
it.
Hi, Jonathan. I'm Gary Allen. I'm the co-founder of LeanLaw. I'm a 35-year practicing lawyer, now retired, and I have a big bee in my bonnet about helping law firms become more profitable and better businesses.
Cool. Today's episode, we're talking about AI. And what we really want to understand is what AI actually changes about the firm's money. And the setup here is that for the last 4 episodes, you and I have been talking about the problem, right? And I just want to refresh and say that we have a strong opinion, 35 years of being a lawyer, thousands of conversations with law firms, that most law firms are not thinking in the context of profitability. They're not thinking effectively around productivity. And there's 4 metrics in LeanLaw that we constantly remind our clients to look at, which is what is your utilization, what is your realization, what is your collection rate, and what is your time to money. And thinking of that not just on the firm level, but also on the partner level and the practice area level. So you and I were talking before about the problems around those issues and what's happening. And now we want to bring the most common topic into the room. It's permeating to our lives everywhere, which is AI and how it changes the firm's money and what it doesn't. So I want to be clear. This is not about AI ethics. It's not about how to use AI per se. It's certainly not about the lawyering around AI. It's the impact of artificial intelligence on the business of law. And that's what we think a lot about in LeanLaw in our AI strategy. So I think that where I want to start is setting the table a little bit about when you're talking to firms, Gary, just to set the table, when a firm tells you they're doing AI, what are they actually doing and what are they not looking at when you're talking about it?
So when you talk to a lawyer about LeanLaw, the thing comes out that always comes out with lawyers, which is they want to spend their time practicing law. So they're thinking about how AI affects their practice. So that's drafting, research, summarizing, case intake, producing work product faster. Now, that's the loud part of it. But the quiet part is that you've now increased the speed of your practice in a lot of respects. What does that speed do to your realization, to your profit margins, to your cash velocity? That's what nobody's measuring, or most people are not measuring. And so that's the real tension here. So AI does in minutes what it used to take hours, and firms are still billing for it by the hour. That's a shrinking number. Nobody's watching, and obviously not a successful business strategy.
I think that's an interesting way to think about it. I heard one of our lawyers asked him and I said, is AI, I don't know, I forgot the question, but he answered the question by saying, AI is not making us necessarily go faster. It's just making our work better. And there's a sentiment there. And I think that's what I think that translates into is first generational AI usage. Those are prompts. Those are some of the tools. But what was interesting, I was at a conference, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is do you think there will be an AI hour build? And let me preface by asking what that means, because it's like we right now have the human hour and we'll bill it. And I know people want to get out of the hourly billing, but we're going to still use that structure. But now there's the AI hour or the AI charge. And what's interesting is at the enterprise level, I was at a legal tech conference last year, and most of the people speaking were MLaw, really large firms. And it was extraordinary to think about the investment, both human capital and dollars, into the AI architecture. And think about the collective intelligence of a law firm. Everyone who's ever worked there feeding into this knowledge base. And that knowledge base then could answer questions that essentially are 85, 90% done. And so the last 15% are essentially the context and experience. So do you ever think that there'll probably an AI charge, but how do you think that plays into the billing model. We're going to get into productivity. We're going to get into some of the undercurrent, but I just want to start with the sort of high level
Yeah,
concept
it's
around that.
an interesting question. I start with it with some skepticism because back when legal tech was Westlaw and Lexis and things like that, a lot of times law firms would add a charge directly for that. And clients really didn't like that. They felt like that was part of the overhead and part of what law firms should do. For to now do something like that on a much larger scale with AI feels like you're swimming upstream. Everything that I'm reading is that we're headed more toward fixed fees and other ways of capturing the value of that AI and not trying to bill for it as a tool. But I
Yeah.
could be wrong. Do you think differently?
I think there's a different concept of a tool. I think there's, and we're being theoretical, and our producer is going to get mad at us for going off script, but you and I are in charge, so we can do that. I think of it like Waymo. My son took a Waymo this weekend we were in Los Angeles, and, you know, Airbnb had navigations and had all sorts of algorithmic ways to price and do all these things that augmented the driver, but the driver still had to be in the seat. And then now Waymo is an automated autonomous vehicle. And when my son was in Koreatown coming out of the club at 2 a.m, he took a Waymo. And the reason being it was significantly less expensive and it charged significantly less for the second thing. The point I'm getting at is and I'm not saying all lawyering is the same, so I'm not trying to commoditize lawyering down to a ride. I'm just making the note that when you look at not Airbnb, you look at the Ubers and the Lyfts, what used to be tech augmenting someone driving, taxi cab to Uber, now has gone autonomous and we're just paying the vehicle and it's giving us the same outcome. So I wonder, I definitely in high complex cases, things that need human beings, things that go back and forth. But I start to wonder, will there be the AI will? Will there be you can have the up version? I think that we're
Yeah.
going to get into places where, when certain legal work is heavily commoditized, will a, will the courts ever be interacting with, and will the individual ever be interacting with a truly AI
Yeah.
lawyer?
I read an interesting article about this, and we're going way off script here, but sorry, Rachel. Uh,
We're in charge of our.
but it was called something like, you know, how do you charge for the last 10% of the work? They describe as what's going to do 90% of a task. All right, so how do you charge for the other 10%? And it was really good at saying that's going to go in a whole bunch of different ways in a whole bunch of different industries. There will be places where you just, now that the 90% is done, the other 10% is high judgment, high value. And so maybe you just raise billable rates, maybe you do fixed fees. Now, on the other hand, there may be other tasks that now can be highly commoditized, and you've created work for a paralegal or something reviewing immigration applications, that something that doesn't require as high a judgment. And it could create jobs for both types of legal employees and different types of pricing for each.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're going to come back to RevOps in a second, but there are now, instead of being a data analyst, you're being a data architect. Instead of just being as someone who can do the math around stats, now you're basically running modeling that can produce the stats because the math isn't, I wouldn't say isn't essential, but architecting. So I do think there'll be emergence. And in tying this back into profitability, that's the conundrum, right? Because when you're looking at the business models, and the other observation I had from that it was called the Legal Tech Fund from that conference was, boy, they were talking about the top 10% of legal work, which encompasses obviously a lot of dollar volume. And then I was thinking back to some of our clients at LeanLaw and some of the interactions, and they're not even thinking about AI.
Mhm.
Not in the context of, how does it impact our revenue operations function, right? Everyone's thinking about, can Claude do some lawyering? And I think that's where the rubble will meet the road. And I think it's going to take a minute because that 60-year-old or 55-year-old lawyer in Des Moines, Iowa, who has a great practice, may make some of the teams so it makes some of the workflow more efficient. But at the end of the day, that person's intellect, stature, and referral network is going to produce all the revenue that he or she needs to
Well,
retire.
that
It's,
last 10% is really important, even if you're doing AI for 90%.
and the reality is there's so much liability in that last 10% about that's what you're buying is the human intellect to interpret it all. So let's move on so that Rachel won't get too mad at us. So when a firm tells you that you're doing AI, what are they actually doing? And what do you think they're not looking at? Oh, I think we talked about that. Sorry.
We did talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe one thing we could talk about is just what AI actually changes. So what does it actually do? And we hit around the edge of that. And I see,
I'm doing such a bad job in my hosting today. Thank you. Thank you for picking up the pieces there.
so there are three big concrete shifts. So the delivery time compresses. We talked about that. So if you're doing hourly billing, now you've just given away a bunch of hours. So but it's fixed fee, you're expanding your margin. We talked about that is a conundrum for law firms, 90% of which are billing their time hourly and not taking advantage of that margin. The value didn't change just because the hours did. Now you might see other changes in the market, but and a will drafted in half the time is still worth the same value to the client as it was. And the other thing is that while lawyers may still be thinking about hourly billing, a lot of their clients have shifted the way they think. And a majority of them already want fixed fees and a single charge for the matter. So now they've got that market change, that market pressure.
You think that that's so it's interesting. There's a lot of movement towards value-based pricing and flat rate pricing. And I, as a consumer, we just did some legal work, and I, as a consumer, want a flat rate price, or at least want better telegraphing as to what the price is going to be. Because I'm not naive to know that everything can be done in a flat rate, especially when there's two parties talking to each other. But I wonder if that concept is ahead of their skis. And what I mean by that is, I do think that certain niches within law can really benefit from flat rate work. And I wonder, I want to pull this back to RevOps and what LeanLaw is thinking. LeanLaw doesn't think that everyone's going to magically move to value-based pricing and do flat rate work. I think that's a misnomer. I think some of it's regimented in how a lawyer wants to operate, and he or she is making their billings and everything's kosher. But I think what AI does and what's important, I guess we're going to talk about that in a second, but what I think is that it should be, from a RevOps standpoint, helping you at least give guidance as to what the budgets would be. And instead of just looking back and saying, hey, what did I charge that guy in 2016 for this type of project? AI should, and this is what we're working on LeanLaw in terms of revenue intelligence, help them understand at least what the framework is. So if they go out and do a flat rate price, they have some data that tells them what the price should be based on what it is, or the precursor to really getting a flat rate is understanding your profitability, which goes back to our previous episodes. So even if you charge a flat rate, you still need to track your hours because you need to know your larger cost, which is your labor. So when I hear people talk about value-based pricing, I'm just curious what you think. I understand the market aspires to it, but is the market really ready for it?
The key point is that the AI did not make your work worth less. It made your billing model the thing that decides whether you keep the difference or give it away. Now, to be a little more nuanced, looking at that, I think this is a conundrum for a lot of law firms. I've talked with several of them. We're going, okay, we've seen that AI reduces the cost of doing certain tasks. So now how do we price for those tasks? And does that just kind of come out in the wash? Or do we try to create a fee that's going to cover that? And I don't think there's an easy answer right now. You're right. The market is not really ready for fixed fee pricing because it's hard and it requires real thinking about, what is the value you're creating and how does your client perceive that? So this is not a simple conversation. And it's, as I just said, it affects a whole bunch of different types of work and jobs. It's quite complex to figure out how it rolls through your business, I think.
Yeah, I think that what folks need to focus on today, in my opinion, I think that if you talk about AI relative to revenue, it's revenue intelligence around collections, profitability, utilization. And the reason I state that is
Mhm.
the first thing that people want us when they buy our software want to know is the accounting. Do we work well with QuickBooks? Is the accounting? Then they want to know the basic tooling works. But number three, or it can be number two, it's all about reporting. And so there's this long tail of crappy reporting and difficult to find data that doesn't have context around revenue operations, utilization, realization, collections, time to money. And so when I look in and think about use cases for LeanLaw has something called Clerk. It's our first generation of our AI tooling. And it's
ClerkAI, right?
yeah, it's called ClerkAI, and it's meant to help that back office or even attorney ask basic questions that may not be clickable or whatnot in a matter. But my point is simply is when our most forward-thinking clients around AI, I don't believe they're trying to use AI to necessarily do all the legal work. They're trying to augment the legal work. And I think that's gonna take a few years, if not years, to really fully realize into the next model of legal services and how they're delivered and how they're created, how they're done. I don't think it happens overnight. I think it takes a minute for it to really mature and
Totally.
develop. The same way that it was cool to buy books off the internet from Amazon, but what we see in Amazon 20 years later, actually 40 years later from the 30 years later, almost 40 from the 90s and when it came to market, is that it's a whole different beast. Who thought we'd get TV and watch live sporting
Yeah.
events from our bookseller? So I just think that revenue operations and data, and we see people hooking up Claude, using other tools to really try to use data analytics to understand that. So what do you think vendors are skipping what's the part they skip past? What doesn't AI fix when you're
Yeah.
talking about that?
That's a great question because it's hard to overstate the hype around AI right now. And so it's important to take a deep dive into it. But for example, here- some of the issues are that most in-house counsel report no noticeable savings from using outside firms using AI. So the technology got ahead and then the operating model didn't. So there's a huge thing right there. The clients aren't seeing the value in it. Sven, and again, to go back to our episode 2, if you drop AI into a disconnected stack, it doesn't fix the money. If you don't have, you just have a faster leak. So if your data can't move from time capture through billing, through collections, a faster draft that the lawyer creates doesn't close the gap between the work performed and the cash collected.
Yeah, let me restate that in a slightly different way. A lot of people ask LeanLaw and they said, gosh, are you worried as the CEO of LeanLaw, are you going to be displaced by some AI billing tool? And I said, of course I worry every day. But in reality, I was just talking to an investor and I said something I hadn't said, which was, Jonathon spent now 11 years building workflow across hourly business models, flat rate business models, and contingent business models. And we've had thousands and thousands of conversations with clients that manifested into these workflows that are really critical. And we think AI is really important at supercharging that and bringing revenue intelligence and really making that workflow. But AI doesn't just magically create workflow from nothing. It has to train off of something. And what we've learned is that in our hundreds and hundreds of clients, there's nuance in every one of them and how they want to operate. And
Yep.
so what you were talking about disconnected tools across different stacks, absolutely. But it's also that you can't overestimate the importance of structured workflow, which creates really good data, which gives you good outcomes. And I think that's the part that people think that I'll just slap Claude on it and Claude can do all my billing. And the answer is it can do some of it, but that last 15% is really important. And we're not at LeanLaw trying to distance ourselves or saying Claude isn't important. We're saying, hey, let's build our what we call an MCP server. Let's build our server so you can use Claude to do whatever you want to do with LeanLaw. But we still think there's core value in some of the fundamental tools that we use day in, day out. Let's keep going on that pace.
Yeah. So
Are there
just to
any
kind
others
of,
here? Yeah.
just to kind of sum that up, AI on a disconnected stack doesn't fix the money part of things. It just helps you leak money faster.
Yeah.
And then, so for AI to pay off on the money, the workflow has to hold together. And that's what you said. And it needs to be one experience all the way from onboarding to collections, regardless of what tools you use in the stack.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is that like we're launching a platform. We launched our contingent workflow earlier this year. And one big component of it is liens. Those things, liens are weird because the law firm has a fiduciary responsibility to manage it and pay it out if it's settled. But if it doesn't, it's just part of its artifact, right? And so it can't go on the balance sheet. It can't go in an accounting system. It has to have its own thing. And what we found is that's being all done in spreadsheets today, lien management. So we built some workflow, right? But then you can think about AI layered on it saying, okay, what's a good negotiated price for this lien? When should it be settled? AI can bring so much intelligence, but you still need the workflow around the liens as an example of that.
Yeah, exactly. The workflows are critical. If you haven't built them right, it's not gonna save you money down the road.
So we weren't as organized as we could have been, Gary, and I think that's okay. But before someone buys their next AI tool, and the one thing that AI is really good is marketing because they have AI creating marketing. So there's a lot of promises that tells you it. But so what kind of closing advice, where would you have people start?
Yeah, so you need to take one concrete action. So before you buy an AI tool that promises to do the work faster, ask a different question. So what does this tool tell you about your money? So pull your realization rate. If your AI has been moving through your firm for a year and that number has not changed, the problem was never the speed of the work or the efficiency of doing particular tasks. It's the problem is that your systems can't show you what that speed did. And you need to start there. You need to be able to measure what the difference is in your business before you spend money on your production.
Yeah, I'm going to say it a different way, but I'm going to say it in my terms, which is whether using AI as a function of your lawyering or you're using AI in your rev ops. At LeanLaw, when we start to think about how we want to use AI, we first say, what's the job to be done? And we really are tight about the job to be done. And when I say the job to be done, the work to be done, that's where you begin to measure, hey, are we making money from this or not? Is it producing the outcome we want? And most people look at it and say, cool, we made Joe 20% faster. But to your point, is Joe being 20% faster impacting the realization or impacting collections, impacting the
Or
downstream revenue?
utilization.
Right.
And
They're not tying those two things together. They're just using tools because they feel the pressure to use the tools. So it's important. Hey, if you can't benchmark those numbers, hey, this is before and after, then why are we paying for the tools other than maybe for lifestyle? Life is easier because we're using those tools. And the second point I'm going to make is that I will tell you what is right down the street from us in terms of AI cost is that everyone is giving it away for free right now. And LeanLaw's facing this, all our AI coding tools that we use. And all of the vendors upstream are saying, hey, now it's time to start making money, whether it's
us.
Anthropic wanting to go public or OpenAI or whatever venture capitalists saying, hey, we need to think about public companies. And that is going to radically change the cost of these tools. And the second thing is some of these tools are going to fail because their go-to-market and early adoption was a byproduct of the enthusiasm of testing AI. And so the point I'm making is it retreats back to those core tools. That's why I feel really confident about LeanLaw. Additive AI around revenue ops is one of our strategies. So anyways, I think about the job to be done. I think about the future cost. And to your point, we've got to ensure that when we invest in tools that we think are going to benefit the bottom line, we're not doing and saying, hey, do we think it's faster? That we're actually measuring before, during, and
As
after.
best we can, even if it's not perfect.
Yeah.
Measure it.
Yeah. Cool. Gary, thanks for this. Thanks for this recording. or I should say this conversation, and appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think we dived into some interesting stuff there.
Oh, we did. Talk soon. Just go live.